Well, I would say my first musical memories are my grandmother banging on pots and pans to try to get me to eat. And I mean, it's incorporated into my entire being. I can't say I exactly remember it, but that and some strange pop songs from the 1950s. How Much Is That Doggy in the Window? Seeing bands on television later, but that wasn't so early. I would say the science of sound was a very important part of my musical being. My father was the designer at University Loudspeakers. He invented speaker casings and microphones, and so our house was always filled with books on audio and technology, and from him I became interested in electronics. I would say one of the strongest musical memories was visiting my father at work, and they had a factory where they had huge punch presses stamping out speaker baskets, and so it was incredibly loud. And then in another room was the office, and they had an anechoic chamber, and it was absolutely dead quiet. So these were both very profoundly exciting to me. The guitar was very important for me because it was in the air. When I first began to appreciate music very deeply, it was by listening to groups like the Yardbirds and the Rolling Stones, the Beatles too, but things that had more psychedelic guitar, more intense guitar, fuzz guitar, Jeff Beck, and then Jimi Hendrix. My first bands, I was playing clarinet with a microphone that I installed and through a homemade fuzz box. But what I really wanted to do was play guitar. So in 1968, I got an electric guitar and began to teach myself. This was also at a time when I was working as a junior assistant scientist. I had a fellowship, a Ford Future Scientist of America, and I spent a lot of my time in the lab building better fuzz boxes and playing with tape delay units. Science fiction for me has always been an important part of the way I approach music, because I like to think of the music I make as speculative music. It's like music that could exist in an alternate reality if the rules of music were different, or if the rules of the music business were different. So I would say it's not so much creating a science fiction world, but imbuing the reality of a different reality. The idea of making instruments is tied up in the music. There's an old software cliche, software first, then hardware. And the thing about most musical instruments in the Western canon is they're made for Western music in the classical and Baroque era. And of course, the electric guitar is a very good example of a visionary instrument, the synthesizer as well. I became interested in the music of Harry Partch. In 1968, I'd say a very important part of my musical education was being a DJ. When I had my science fellowship, I got a job as a midnight to 4 a.m. DJ on the radio station in Pittsburgh, and they had incredible weird stuff, you know, and there was many things coming out at that time, from Deutsche Grammophon, from Nonsuch, from New World, from Folkways, lots of small labels putting out non-Western music and contemporary music. And this was all very inspiring, and discovering the music of Harry Partch on Columbia led me to his book, Genesis of a Music, and how he created musical instruments to embody the music he was hearing. And this was inspiring to me. I began to experiment with making instruments and finding ways to prepare my instruments and augment my instruments to make them do things that they weren't designed to do. I would not consider myself an audiophile, because there's a certain preciousness of that approach to making music. At the same time, as a producer and as a composer, I have very exact ideas about how I want the music to sound. But sometimes when you're making music live, the situations aren't ideal. You're working with an instrument that's imperfect, in a sound system that's imperfect, in a room that's imperfect, and that brings you to something unexpected. And that is perfect, you know, to be spontaneous in a feedback loop with the situation. I mean, of course, if I have everything under control, which it never is, then you work towards a platonic ideal of sound. Well, Monk is about economy and about a fractured view of the world, like looking at the world through a vision that's slightly slanted, and it allows you to reveal things. Also, I would say my music has always been about excess. You know, I like saturated sounds, I like lots of drums, I like big feeding back guitars, you know, and lots of sounds simultaneously, whether I'm writing an orchestra piece or playing electric guitar solo in my Tectonics project. But with Monk, it's about distilling it down, fragments and melody, little bits of chord change. Then I take it and build on it and grow. But it's all about reducing things to just little fragments and hearing the kind of humanity, the humor, the heartbreak. And, you know, whenever I was too full of sonic excess, then I would listen to Monk and it would bring me down to earth. When I'm improvising, even when I'm working with Monk's music as a source or when I'm playing blues, I'm bouncing it off of my own compositional strategies and filtering it through the way I hear. I mean, I like the craft of learning music exactly, learning how to play bebop, learning how to play blues like Otis Rush or Robert Johnson or Muddy Waters, but ultimately it's filtered through my own mechanism and it comes out sounding like me. I can't help it, you know.